Hi, welcome to the Personality Hacker Podcast. My name is Joel Mark Witt.
And I'm Antonia Dodge. And we want to continue our series, even though we didn't really mention that it was a series, but we've kind of been doing a series on the advantage and disadvantage that personality psychology can give people in a variety of contexts. Like one of our first podcasts on this topic was, are they reliable at all? Like, what are the limitations of personality psychology? And then we did a podcast on personality types and personality psychology in a business context, and what are some of the ways that it can be very advantageous, and what are some of the limitations to it. And we want to talk about personality types and personality psychology in relationships. I think this is almost always where people naturally go right from the beginning when they even learn about the topic of personality types. If they pick up a book, the first thing they do is they go look for their personality type and an overview and description of that. And then they head to the personality type of their mate or their children. I think we just naturally understand that one of the most powerful contexts that this information can give us is in the realm of relationships.
Yeah, and not just relationships romantically, but other family relationships or friend relationships, your friends, your children, your parents. It's an array of insight into the people that you're intimate with, that you spend time around and that you relate to.
And I think the reason why we just instinctively know that this can be a very powerful tool in relationships is because it's a very powerful tool in communication. It's one of the first times when we really, maybe we've read our profile someplace and we just get this overwhelming feeling of oh my gosh, I'm not alone. Other people think like me. And then we realize there is a pattern to this. There's a pattern to how people think, and there's a pattern to how we interact with each other. And we recognize if we can just crack the pattern, if we can just kind of figure out how this works, then I can be speaking the language of the people that I love, and I can introduce them to my language. Because our personality type is I remember one time being introduced to this metaphor of it's like a fish trying to describe water, right? How would a fish even begin to describe water? It's home, it's transportation, it's its latrine, it's everything to the fish. Water is everything, literally everything to a fish. And our personality types are so similar. It's the world we live in. It's the lens through which we see everything. It's our everyday experience. And it's something that's so unconscious within us that it's hard to get language for it, right? Like when somebody says, hey, describe who you are, we almost always start with the word right? Because we're trying to get some time here to try to encapsulate everything that is us. And when we learn about personality types, it gives us some language to describe how we operate and how we work. And then we go, oh my gosh, it'll do the exact same thing for my loved ones. It will give me some language to understand this other person who's, if I asked them to describe themselves, they would do the same thing. They would start with the word
Yeah, and I think there's this, to the uninitiated person growing up in the world, the moment you have this realization that, not everybody sees the world the same way I do, that is a huge aha moment for you. Particularly the people in your relationship world, the people you're in love with, or your children, your spouse, your parents, whatever. Usually this happens, typically, the teenage years is often a common time this happens, where you have a wake-up moment. They fundamentally see the world differently than I do. Oh, I see what's going on. They're not just an idiot. They're not being myopic. They're not trying to be a jerk toward me. They just see things differently. What a wake-up call. What an incredible insight I've just had. And we've all had these moments, right, in our lives when we've had this aha. And we usually kind of have an embryonic aha where we kind of get that people think different. But then as we continue to evolve and grow as people, we realize, I still have these wake-up moments in my life. These people are just thinking so much different than I am. It's not that they're bad or wrong. They're just so different. And I can make space for that. And I can make space for myself to be different as well, which is really powerful in relationship, to kind of have that two-sided perspective to this.
Oh, totally. Well, like you said, that moment when you realize that the other person is not just trying to be obtuse or deliberately obnoxious.
Well, they might be, but not always.
They might be.
But not in this context.
Mostly, though, they're not.
Yeah, exactly.
The overwhelming majority of the time, people are not trying to be jerks. Most people are just trying to get through life. They're just trying to figure things out the best way that they know how. They have a certain amount of tools in their toolbox, and they're just trying to navigate life using these tools. And when we don't recognize how different another person can be from us, they feel really obnoxious. They feel like they're trying to be offensive. I think of, you actually mentioned this when we went over our series on intuition, but you had a cousin of yours very upset with you, very angry, and saying things like, why can't you just come to family reunions and talk about football and your job and normal stuff? Why do you have to show up and say all sorts of weird things? Now, what's interesting about this, and they were really angry at the time, like they were chewing your ear off and you didn't actually get an opportunity to say anything back, if I remember correctly. But this was all part of this amalgam of why they were so upset with you, is that you couldn't just be quote unquote normal. And so as far as they were concerned, you were being deliberately obnoxious, right? Like, why can't you just be like everybody else? Why do you have to show up as a unique you?
Yeah.
And so when you don't have the tool in your toolbox that goes, everybody is a little different, but not in these tiny little microscopic ways, but sometimes in big, powerful ways that will make the other person not feel familiar at all. When you get that wake-up call, all of a sudden there's this, like you said, you can create this space for them. You're like, oh my gosh, they're not trying to be deliberately obnoxious. They are simply coming at the world in a radically different way than me. And I don't know if this is 100% the case, but I just imagine this collective sigh that goes through people. Like, all of their parts just kind of go, oh, okay.
Yeah.
Like, I don't have to be anything to anybody else the way that they think I should be. I'm just going to be myself. And they don't have to be the way that I think they should be. They can just be themselves. Ah, that's nice, right? Now we give each other some space to be totally different.
So now get back to our topic. Let's say you're married or in a committed romantic relationship with someone who thinks fundamentally different than you. You know, you realize that, okay, they're not being deliberately obtuse, but we still fundamentally think differently. And that could be a challenge because no matter how much permission you give someone and yourself, you still have challenges, and you hit on this earlier about communication. It's great because it enables better communication. So there's a starting point of understanding the other person and understanding yourself and saying, okay, I communicate in this way, this person communicates in this way. Let's see if we can bridge that gap through, co-creative communication that can actually be better served to both of us and get our needs met and speak to how we see the world. And then you start layering in stuff like worldview and upbringing and programming and all these things as well. But just at the personality level, those differences are powerful to understand. And then what do you do with those now? Like, how do you start to navigate this world? Let's say your significant other is very different than you and how they think, how they learn information, how they make decisions. And we're not talking, again, about behavior. Yes, behavior is an emergent of this, but we're talking about, from a personality psychology level, of how the brain learns new information and how the brain makes decisions or evaluates, judgments on the information it's learning. And if you both have differences in this, you're going to come at the world in radically different ways. And that can be a cause of tension and turmoil and conflict in your relationship.
Yeah. Every time we talk about how the mind is programmed and that each of us learns new information differently and each of us evaluates that information or makes decisions differently, like the way it sounds is so much more sort of neutered than how it actually ends up manifesting, because those are the profound etymology of everything. How you learn new information is going to completely inform your relationship to the world.
Yeah.
And you can see this. You can see somebody, I'm just taking a really easy description of this. When somebody learns through doing versus somebody who learns through reading, right? So a person has to learn by being kinesthetic and being into it and picking it up and being tactile and interacting with it, and actually has to learn through doing. They are a profoundly different person than the person who just says, just give me a stack of books and I'll just learn it by reading, right? I'll pick up the information through somebody else's, experience. And so, what we have here are two totally different ways of going around.
We have a good school student and a bad school student.
Exactly.
Basically.
Oh my gosh, that's exactly it. And so this person who has to learn through doing is going to get a ton of feedback from the world. Like especially in a school context where that's not okay. Like, they need to be quiet. They need to be sitting there. They need to be getting, straight A's through rote memorization. And the fact that they need to actually get up and interact with the thing they're learning, that's not okay. And let's go ahead and call that kid ADD.
Yeah.
Right? And let's look at the good little student who sits there and learns through rote memorization or learns through, reading and gets straight A's because they're uber smart in this particular context. And let's reward them and tell them they're really great. And let's not ever let on that person has to actually go out and experience the world. So now you've got somebody who maybe has been told, and I'm painting this in a negative light, but let's say this person has been told that they're ADD, and this other person has been rewarded through inactivity, right? Only through reading. And so now we have two people who are dealing with life with their own issues that have grown from these two different experiences. We've got somebody who may be very intelligent kinesthetically, but has been told they're dumb their whole life and needs to be medicated. And we've got this other person who might fear everything, right?
Yeah.
Like, never venture out into the world and actually do anything because they've been so rewarded for just being able to get the answer right.
Yeah.
And so the way that we learn new information impacts all of our experiences and how people respond to us, and then our relationship with those other people and how they respond. Now let's just take these two components, and now let's raise these people up to adults and let's get them married to each other.
Yeah.
Right? And the reason why these two people are likely to marry each other is because in nature, polarity creates attraction, right? Like, we are attracted to people very different. So now we've got this one person, let's say we've got a woman who has to be kinesthetic, right? Has to learn through doing. And she's active, and she's always engaging with the world. And maybe she's bubbly, and maybe she's like, like kind of flighty maybe, but like really interesting to be around and has all these really interesting perspectives on the world. And then she marries a guy who loves to read and just likes to stay home and take in new information and maybe kind of fears getting out and interacting with the world because he got rewarded for just getting the answer right. And we've got these two people who are powerfully attracted to each other, and they're now in a relationship, and they were like, that polarity was like, oh, they couldn't even, resist each other. And now they're in a marriage, and now she wants to go out and he wants to stay home.
Yeah.
Right?
Which can cause tons of conflict.
Just that alone. I want to get out and hang out with people, come with me. No, I'd rather stay home and read tonight, or play a video game tonight, or watch a documentary on World War II tonight, or whatever it is. And so she feels like he's never with her, right, when she's out engaging with the world. And he feels like she's neglecting him because
she's untethered.
Yeah, because she'll never stay home and do the stuff that he wants to do with him. And now we've got a fight. Right? Now we've got a constant power struggle. We've got the push-pull. We've got the yin-yang. And both of them proceed into what we call a personality hacker. And we stole it from actually David Kiersey's book, Please Understand Me Too. What we call the Pygmalion Project. Now, Pygmalion was, in Greek mythology, he was a sculptor who sculpted his ideal woman out of marble. And then she came to life, and now he had this ideal woman. But the way that David Kiersey talked about it in Please Understand Me Too is he said the Pygmalion Project is when we are attracted to somebody completely opposite from us, and then as soon as we get into a relationship with the other person, with this person who's totally opposite, we pick up our hammer and chisel, and we start trying to craft them into a version of us. Into this idealized version of us, which is they're totally attractive to us because they're the opposite, but now we're going to turn them into an example of ourselves.
Yeah.
And so that obviously does not fly in a relationship. Like, if you're in a relationship with somebody who's trying to turn you into somebody else, into a version of themselves, right? There is nothing more offensive than not being accepted for who we are. And that's one of the biggest problems in a marriage.
And so what happens out of this is, what I see happening is people go, okay, so we know that there's some conflict here. We're not seeing things the same. Something's wrong. Okay, what we're going to do as a couple, let's go ahead and get some counseling, or let's read some books and get some personal development materials around this, because we've got to fix our relationship. So they go out and they buy a bunch of books. Maybe one buys the books and tells the other they're not really into reading, or the one attends a seminar because they like go out and meet people, and they come back and tell the other person. They try to do it together. And what ends up happening, because particularly in gender roles, traditional heterosexual couple, let's just say, male, female, we have overgeneralizations of how women behave and how men behave. And so personal development is often written, well, this is how women are, and this is how men are. Men want their man cave, and they have a very analytical nature. And a lot of personal development is written for, I would consider them stereotypes of men and women in a heterosexual traditional relationship. modernist traditional. These are the gender roles. These are the stereotypical roles. And so you try to apply some of the personal development to your relationship, and it breaks down, and you wonder, what are we doing wrong? Well, the answer in my mind is because you probably are different personalities than the generalization, the stereotype of those gender roles that are being taught or helped through this personal development work you're doing.
Yeah.
Whereas if you understand your personality at a core level of how you're learning and how you're making decisions, you might say, okay, I see this book is written for that classical type of stereotyped male and stereotyped female, and we don't fit into that. Maybe the female has more of those characteristics that personality type book is talking about, or that personal development book is talking about, or vice versa. And so you can see how understanding personality psychology can help you make better choices, not only in your relationship, but the type of information and help that you access to better your relationship.
Yeah, I would say that really is a situation that people run into a lot. That, I think of the very famous book, Women Are From Mars, Men Are From Mars, Women Are From Venus.
Something like that.
Or Women Are From Venus.
John Gray, right?
Yeah, Dr. John Gray. So what's really interesting about that is I think that those stereotypes, they have a basis in truth, right? Like, they wouldn't resonate with such an enormous audience if there wasn't a large measure of truth there. And so those are impactful books. If they are something, like if the quote-unquote stereotype seems to match you and fit you, then absolutely chase that, right? Chase that down its rabbit's hole and allow it to, work its magic in your life. However, if you're somebody who doesn't really resonate with the stereotypes, like you said, the traditional heterosexual relationship where women are supposed to be evidencing themselves like this and men are supposed to be evidencing themselves in the other way, if you don't fit those stereotypes, the big question is, where do you go for relationship advice, right? And I remember reading a book. I was really into sort of how single people found each other and some of the quote unquote the rules that you're supposed to be doing in order to be more attractive. And so I was reading books for both men and women. And I remember resonating with the male pickup literature more than I was resonating with the female books like The Rules. I remember reading The Rules and going, I don't know if you've ever heard of the book The Rules, but if you haven't, it's a series of rules that women are supposed to be implementing when they're in the dating process that turns them irresistible. And there's certain things like, never let the conversation go more than an hour or two on the first date, right? Because, you want to leave them wanting more. Things like that, right? Like never return a call on I can't remember what the rules were. I just remember reading them and going, there's no way that I'm ever going to be able to implement these rules, because if I'm in an interesting conversation with somebody, I don't want it to end. I'll go to 2:00 in the morning because I am totally zoned in on the conversation, and I'm not going to remember to go, oh, sorry, it's 2 hours, I got to go. I'm going to be keep talking, right? Let's just keep going. And whereas with the pickup for men, it was all cocky, funny, and I can do that. I can be cocky, funny. So it was really interesting to see that I was resonating more with sort of the male literature as opposed to the female literature. Well, I'm a thinker female, right? I'm a personality type that is very uncommon in females and is more represented in males. So it makes sense that I was going to gravitate towards the literature written for a more masculine presence than for a feminine presence. And if I didn't know better, if I didn't have things like personality psychology behind me, I might think that I was a total weirdo and that I was never going to get married, right? And the truth is that I've had lots of great relationships with some amazing men who don't fit the stereotype as well, right? I'm just looking for a different kind of person. And if I didn't recognize or understand that about myself, I may have gotten in a relationship where I was going, okay, I should be more like the female essence. I should be more like this person. I should be looking for a guy that fits the male stereotype. I should get in a relationship like that. And then I should just kind of try to shoehorn myself into those descriptions, and that will be my life, and I'll constantly be trying to put myself in this mold in the relationship context. And when I realized I don't have to do that, man, I can just show up as me, as a exploration accuracy person. I can just show up as me, and then I can allow myself to organically attract the kind of person that's going to organically attract, and then I've had a lot more success than I think I would have before.
Those should those should statements. Man, see, you say, had you not known better or known different, and I look at my first marriage and I didn't know better. I wasn't as steeped in personality psychology and understanding how people tick. And so when I had trouble in my marriage, I went and I chased resources, personal development resources, to say, I want to fix my marriage. I want to make things better. I want to take proactive measures on this. So I would read information in books that were talking about, you as a man need to open your heart more. You need to not be so domineering and so, difficult. Stay out of your man cave. All these traits that you were written toward a type of dude that was not me. And I'm like, oh yeah, that's right. I need to be more open-hearted. I need to be this and that. And so here I'm like jotting down notes and I'm trying to be better ways of being a man, showing up to a relationship by this advice I was getting that was never intended for me. And I'm reading it thinking, oh, I must be bad in this area and bad in this area. And here I'm doing things that were not designed for me to do as my personality type. They were designed for a much different type of male in a relationship, probably the more that classical gender stereotyped male that I don't really resonate with, but I didn't know any better. So I'm like, okay, I should be. And I think that, there were other problems as well in our marriage, my first marriage, but I think part of it was me not understanding enough of what kind of personal development work I should have been doing. I probably should have been doing a lot of the exact opposite things I did, but because the material was written for a particular type of male, I showed up and I acted in ways I don't think was beneficial for the marriage because of that, because of who I am particularly. And so I think that's what we're talking about from both of our personal experiences. If you're somebody that doesn't fit the stereotype or the mold, there are other things that you can do and ways of seeing things through the lens of your personality type, unique in particular to you and the person you're in a relationship with.
Yeah, I think that it's easy for you and I to see this so well contrasted in who we are, because if you look at the population breakdown of, say, take the Myers Briggs personality indicator, if you take that, the population breakdown, the majority of females are what's called the ISFJ personality type, or we call them memory harmony in the genius style. They make up a huge percentage of women. And of the 16 types, they are the largest percentage for females. They're like 15 to 20% of women are ISFJ. And I'm an ENTP, which is the exact opposite type. So most of the content that's written for women and advice given to women are for somebody who is the exact opposite personality type of me. And it's the same thing with you. I think the majority of men, or like the highest percentage of the 16 types that are represented in men, are ISTJs in the Myers-Briggs system, and you're an ENFP.
Exact opposite.
So it really kind of shows up very obvious for both of us, right? Like, because we are the exact opposite of the stereotype. That said, if you aren't so exact opposite, you're just a little different, it still might be showing up the same way for you. Like if somebody's giving you all sorts of advice that fit the stereotype and you're like, kind of, right? For us, it was like, no, that's totally opposite. That is not how I work at all. But you might be somewhere in between. You might be like, yeah, that kind of works for me, but kind of doesn't. And you're not really sure how, and you're not really sure why, and like which component of the advice should you be taking and which should you maybe rejecting because it's not exactly you. None of that is known unless you get how these personality types work, right? Like, who is that stereotypical male? Who is that stereotypical female? Why are they thinking in exactly that way? How are they learning information? What is the evaluation criteria they're making? And how am I similar and how am I different will allow you to take all the coaching and advice that you get for relationships and really be able to apply it to your unique individual self. Because you'll go, okay, I am, take for example, if you're female, I am harmony, right? So all of the stereotypical advice is being written for memory harmony people. And I am definitely harmony. So I'm really going to resonate with that piece. But I might not be memory. I might be perspectives. And that means I'm going to see it a little differently. I'm going to go a little differently than what the advice is giving. And so I'm going to alter the advice to specifically myself in the harmony component, but then I'm going to look for different advice that's going to be more tailored to perspectives. And so if you know your type and you kind of get the type of the, what the writer is is talking to, like the personality type that the writer, like their particular avatar, you can see the contrast and the similarities between you and this avatar. And you can recognize this piece of their information is totally applicable to me, but this piece is not. But I don't have to take it part and parcel. I don't have to take all of the advice and go, okay, I've got to shoehorn myself into this description. I've got to shoehorn my marriage or relationship into these descriptions of how they're supposed to look. You can go, okay, it's contextual. It's, I need to be acknowledging this piece, but maybe I need to look for different information or advice when it comes to this component of who I am.
Absolutely. And I think that, we've had people that have gone through our profiler training course that have come out on the other end with a knowledge of how people make decisions and learn information. And now they're able to, in their personal relationships, not only see the information they're going to access and be able to vet that, like you're talking about, but then also understand at the core level the dynamic between them and their lover, their spouse. And oftentimes it's one person that comes through profiler training or one of our other products or programs that kind of gets insight into this. And their lover, their spouse, their significant other doesn't necessarily have interest or desire to go through this, but still helps their relationship because one person has a perspective of the unique nature of the two people in the relationship and then the unique nature of the dynamic between those two people, which is also powerful to see because it manifests itself differently based on type and based on circumstance and based on the knowledge of this particular system we're talking about. Mm-hmm. So all of this plays well into as a tool in enabling better and more communicative, we believe more loving and more supportive relationships at the romantic level. And then it filters to all your other relationships as well if you have this kind of knowledge because, you're interacting with your child and you're like, why is my kid acting this way? And then, oh, I see, their personality is probably this here because now I have some lexicon. I have some ability to profile them. They're young yet, but I'm starting to get some of the patterns they're exhibiting. We just had this happen with your stepson, my son, my second son, where he was exhibiting patterns in a certain way, and we've been refining how we see him. As he grows, we're getting more information about his personality. We have a kind of a tentative type on him right now, and I'm able to meet him where he's at in a different way than I was thinking he was a different type. In other words, I'm able to meet him where he's at in that relationship, and I believe our relationship is getting stronger because of my ability and your ability to meet him where he's at, because he's not going to be able to do it right now as a child. To meet us, he's a kid. He's just doing what he's doing, right? So this really shows up in all sorts of dynamics, interpersonal dynamics. And we've also had people not only use this in their personal life, but use it in coaching other relationships, which is a powerful frame to come from. Because you can then sit down with two people, and you do this in your practice, is sit down, you profile each person, and then you find the cross points of communication, struggle, the way their worldview, their minds, their decision-making all functions inside that relationship. And you can see them as two individuals, and then the relationship is like a third entity. And our students have gone through, and they've actually incorporated this into their coaching practices of being able to help people and coach them in their relationship based on knowing all these interplay of parts.
Yeah. So if you're using personality psychology to get a more fleshed out perspective of how you think and get a more fleshed out perspective of how your mate or your children or the people you're in a relationship with thinks, and you're trying to kind of figure out what are some of the similarities, what are some of the differences, how can you meet them where they're at, how can you help communicate to them where you're at, then you're using it right. If you're using personality types to put people in a box and to say you're supposed to be behaving this way because this is your type, you've sort of lost you've missed the boat.
You weaponized it.
Yeah, exactly. You've weaponized it. You've turned what can be used as a tool to build into a tool to, or a weapon to bludgeon with. And I really see this when people grossly oversimplify humans in general, because they're seeing a certain pattern that has been very helpful for them, and now they've decided that this is the tool. Like, they've got a hammer and all the world's a nail. That's kind of what they've done. One of the examples I think of this is when you're using the Myers Briggs system. I've seen people have an impression of what a sensor is and what an intuitive is. Now, we just did a whole series on what is intuition, so please feel free to reference, and in fact, the podcast, What is Intuition? describes a bit of the difference between somebody who's called an intuitive and somebody who's called a sensor. But just as sort of a, cliff notes, an intuitive is somebody who sees the world and interacts with it using unconscious pattern recognition, primarily as their way of learning new information. So they're always speculating, asking what if questions. They want to know what's going on behind the curtain, basically. Whereas sensors are more interested in what's verifiable and reliable information. So they're using their senses to tell them, through direct experience, what's going on in the world around them, because they like that direct experience. It's very reliable. It's it's verifiable. So now you've got two styles of people. You've got the people who like reliable, verifiable, and you've got the people who like speculation and what if and abstractions, etc. And there is a certain sort of demographic that say neither the twain shall meet, right? Like sensors should never be in a relationship with intuitives and vice versa. Sensors should be staying with sensors and intuitives should be staying with intuitives. And there is some truth to that when it comes to compatibility. Sensors have a tendency to be more compatible, naturally compatible with other sensors. And intuitives have a tendency to be more naturally compatible with other intuitives. However, you and I both have come from examples of sensor-intuitive relationships. Our parents, my dad's an ESTP, my mom's an INFJ. Your dad's an ISFP and your mom's an INFJ. And both of our parents have been married for 5 decades now? Yeah. They have these long-term relationships. So we've come from examples of marriages that can definitely work when they cross, they sort of cross that sensor intuitive bridge. Now, there have been more struggles, right? Because there is a lot less natural compatibility with the communication style. So my parents had to go through a baptism by fire. They had to go through a time period where they really did not get where each other were coming from, because they're exact opposite types. ESTP, INFJ, total opposite types. So there's lots of confusion, lots of questions about, sort of were they going to stay together? There were time periods that were really difficult for them. And they just kept persevering. And now they have a beautiful relationship where they're totally supportive of each other. And they really appreciate those differences. Now, the point of all that is it's a matter of making sure that you're not using a gross oversimplification, like I'm an intuitive, they're a sensor, or vice versa, to make a gross oversimplified solution. I should never be with somebody who's not of my same sensory or intuitive preference. And when you do that, you lose sort of the magic of the system. You make a rule that may not actually help you be happy. What if you run into somebody who is you're an intuitive and this person's a sensor, and you have shared interests and values, and you have a great time, and you love being around this person, and you want to be in a relationship with them, but you've got this rule in your head that you're only supposed to be with an intuitive. Yeah. You might miss out on a really lovely, beautiful relationship. By the same token, maybe you have a rule that you're supposed to be with an intuitive. So you find the first intuitive that you're mildly compatible with. You end up marrying them and you have a terrible relationship because you're not compatible in all these other ways. So understanding the limitations of the system is recognizing that if you grossly oversimplify and then become dependent on the rules you've created from these gross oversimplifications, that you're actually not going to necessarily lead to the best relationship possible. Whereas if you keep an open frame and you use these systems to help understand what the other person is going through, then you can, first of all, find a compatible person because you're understanding where they're coming from. And then two, when there are issues, as there inevitably are in a marriage or relationship, when you get to the point where you have those issues, then you continue to use this understanding of the other person, how they operate, to give olive branches and to meet them where they're at and to come play in their sandbox if they need that from you. It's to continue to keep the lines of communication open, keep the bridges working well, and then, meet the person where they're at. And if both people are doing that, then you have a fantastic relationship.
Absolutely. So is this resonating with you? Are you finding yourself getting some insight into how typology, how profiling could be serving your relationships? And if you're a coach or somebody like that, how it could maybe be serving your clients and customers, because we've really seen that happen as well.
Yeah, if you've used Personality Hackers blogs to, maybe have your type be described or maybe the type of your mate, and if the greater understanding of how that type thinks, if that's really helped maybe solve some issues in your relationships or maybe, come to greater understanding of each other, let us know. Underneath this podcast, on the Personality Hacker website. Leave a comment about how maybe greater understanding of type has helped you communicate with your mate or your children better, maybe friendships, whatever. Let us know by leaving a comment.
Yeah, we've had a lot of people go through our relationship suite. There's basically 3 different courses in there of dating and attraction, marriage and relationships, children and family. And we've had a lot of feedback from people who've basically said that this really opened up their eyes to see the differences in their family dynamic or their lover relationship, or even if they're single still, it helped them refine the kind of person they're looking for. Not like a rule sense, what you were talking about, but more of a general guideline of, oh, okay, this is probably going to be my most compatible type match. So it's a really powerful frame to come from. And we'd love to get some feedback from you at personalityhacker.com. We also would love for you to join our community. It's a growing community over at facebook.com/personalityhacker or on twitter.com/personalityhack. We have conversations running there every day, every week, and the community continues to grow, and we want you to be a part of that with us. So come introduce yourself to us and the others there, and grow this community with us.
Yeah, and if you enjoy our podcast, please feel free to subscribe. And if you get a hankering for it, go over to iTunes and rate us. Let us know how we're doing and how you think we can improve, and let people know whether or not this is a worthy podcast to be listening to.
Absolutely. Well, my name is Joel Mark Witt.
And I'm Antonia Dodge.
And this has been the Personality Hacker Podcast. We'll talk to you on the next episode.